Would y'all give Pastor Rocky from Gateway Church a Heartland welcome? Go ahead and come on up, Pastor Rocky.
Thank you, Pastor Ben, and thank you, Gateway. Heartland. Boy, did you catch that? Okay. Thank you, Gateway. That's my home church. Boy, it seemed like one of our presidents made that kerfuffle a couple weeks ago when he introduced the Ukrainian president as somebody who he was not. So, that was scary. All right, I have to turn to the correct sermon here because this holds two sermons. Yeah, maybe we just do both. Okay. I have said before, this is our favorite place to speak. This is really you welcome us beyond what we deserve. I've said to people before and bragged about this church that when we come in here, they roll out the red carpet. It's just wonderful. But when we walked through the gates this morning, we saw all of this stuff. I thought, wow, you guys have really outdone yourself. Thank you. Our last visit was in March of this past year, and we talked about forgiveness. And I know there were a number of folks that had put names in the little vase that we had there. And I've been praying over those names since that time. Given that sermon several times as well at different churches. We might have a disaster here, but that's all right. And I pray that if you've got a name in there, that God is working in your life to be able to forward that forgiveness and be set free. Since we've spoken here, personally, Pam and myself, our world has changed. I would just say we're walking through a valley right now that's been a couple months long. And it's nothing that I need any sympathy for because we all walk through these valleys at times. We have our mountaintop experiences and we have those in the valley. And when God walks with us through those times, that's when the greatest growth, at least in my life, has occurred. And I do reluctantly say, I welcome those valleys because when you get to the other side, it's glorious. Now, I didn't witness this week, but the Olympics in my life has always been something I really had looked forward to every 4 years when it happened. Now I think it's every 2 years they split it apart. And it has been a staple, a steady thing that I could always depend on. And I didn't watch them this time, didn't watch the opening ceremonies, but I did see on Facebook the post where the Last Supper was mocked pretty graphically. When I hear that, I take that personally. I'm offended at these people doing those things. But I had to think this morning. They weren't insulting me. They were insulting God. And the Bible says that God looks down and laughs at the foolishness of unbelievers. And when I take it personally, I really should not. Because I've not yet fully embraced the fact that life is not just about me. Last night, I reviewed some of the past messages that we've done here. It was 5 years ago that I gave my first message here. 5 years. Boy, that time has gone by so fast. And we've given a lot of messages. Just a few of them. That first message was about the brevity of life. Moses spoke about that in his prayer in Psalm 90. Isaiah and the Psalms talk about life as being like grass. It grows for a time and then is blown away. Its place doesn't even remember it. James talks about life as a vapor that appears for a moment and then disappears. A few months later, we talked about the sentences in your life where sometimes God puts a comma in your plans. I talked one time about the loss of our dog and how this dog came into our life and really changed what was happening in our life. I believe truly that God sent that little animal to us. talked about a sermon that was called Now What? About walking through the changes and the transition in our life. And then about God is up to something with Romans 8:28, that he works in all things for good. Last year I talked about the being content in the commonness of what God calls us to. And then in the book of 1 Peter, where Peter writes this letter to his church, knowing that he is soon to be taken to the next world. But he's not concerned about his life, but instead those who remain behind. There's a common theme in all of those, that life is not about us. And this current valley that we're walking through is a divine reminder that time is short, not to sweat the small stuff, and that God has far bigger things ahead. Not just for me and Pam, for all of us. Have you ever experienced a change in the way you viewed the world? It's called a paradigm shift. Sometimes it happens when your whole world falls apart. Webster's dictionary says it this way: it's an important change that happens when the usual way of thinking about something is replaced by a new and different way. Perhaps the first time as a child you ever attended a funeral, or the first time you've lost somebody very close to you, and you rethink life. Perhaps you've had to move away from your childhood home or a place you've lived for a long time to a strange place, and you rethink stability in your life. Perhaps you've been abused, attacked, or publicly humiliated in some way, and it causes you to rethink of your physical and mental security. Or after a large financial loss, you rethink what's really valuable in life. Perhaps a separation or divorce or an abandonment causes you to rethink your trust in people. Or a college education, you go away and experience new ideas and new concepts, and you come back and perhaps let go of some of your traditional beliefs. Or maybe you suffer a physical setback, a loss of mobility, a loss of speech, a loss of sight, or your clarity of thought. And you change your entire thoughts about God. Reluctantly, I need to share with you something that's, I guess, kind of a secret, something that I've been hiding about myself. And I say reluctantly because I'd rather not tell you this bit of dirt, I guess. But someday, if I do get elected to a high office, I'm sure the tabloids will be dredging this up and say, hey, look at this guy who's been lying to you for all these years. Now what do you think of him? So just let it be known, I'm sharing this voluntarily with you, my family. So here it is. My name is not really Rocky. And to tell the story fully, I have to rewind the tape a number of decades. Before I even attended school, I remember those days were blissful. I could sleep till noon, eat all the cookies I wanted. It was a joy. Play all day. I knew that when school started, there would be times to go to bed, times to wake up. I could eat at nap time when they laid you down in a little blanket, and all kinds of rules. First day of school came. Well, actually for me, first day of school came. My mom had the tendency of always showing up 5 minutes late to things, and my mom and dad both outdid themselves with this one because it was 2 weeks after school had started. They couldn't decide whether I should go this year, or because of my age would it be better to go the following year. But 2 weeks later they decided, now let's just put them in this year. I'm in the car, Mom driving me to school. She gets up and there's the school, and I'm already nervous because I'm already late. And she says, oh, by the way, I got to tell you something. They're going to call you Rodney. Well, why? Because that's your name? Well, why? Well, because that's what's on your birth certificate. But I like Rocky. He's a flying squirrel with a friend named Bullwinkle. And Rocky Marciano is a prize boxer. And Rocky Colavito is a really famous ball player. And one day, Mom, they're going to make a series of movies starring Sylvester Stallone titled Rocky. You just watch. The only Rodney I knew was Rodney Dangerfield, and he gets no respect at all. So my life changed because I didn't have the right name. And now you know the rest of the story. So here's an observation of human behavior. Mostly the little miniature humans. Even if you don't have kids, you're likely to understand this principle. That when the second child is born, the first child tends to push the second child away. Because the first child has lived with the world revolving around them. Everything they needed and most everything they wanted, they got it without competition. Then this ugly kid shows up, uninvited, and everybody's focus is completely on it. The first child's world has been shaken, rattled, and rolled, never to be righted again, because it's just the first of many substantial changes that every human being will experience as we navigate through the days of our lives. A shift in your paradigm or your world view or perspective is not inherently good or bad, but it often leads one to a more serious view or cautious approach to decision making. And I believe that God is actively at work in everybody, believers or unbelievers alike. Yes, God has a plan for each of us. He says in Jeremiah 29 that I know the plans that I have for you, plans not to harm you, but to give you hope and a future. And in this verse, he's talking to his children of Israel who are in a dire situation. And he's saying, I will bring you through this because I have something for you. These are his children of Israel, just as we are his children who have been grafted in. If he loves those children, he loves us. If he has a plan for them, he has a plan for us. But every event that brings a shift or a change or a reevaluation is a carefully designed and executed reminder to each one of us that life is not about us. Would you repeat that with me, please? Life is not about us. The writer in Ecclesiastes really goes to great detail. We believe it was Solomon, the richest and the wisest man ever to live. He experimented with everything possible. He gained the greatest riches of anyone known. He became the wisest man ever known. And yet at the end, he said it was all vanity. It was all futility. Because that life is all about oneself. And he said that life is about God. Several years ago, I think it was 8, maybe 9, we left our farm home in Allendale, which had a barn that was probably 3 times or 4 times the capacity of this. All kinds of space to store stuff. And I never passed up on a bargain. Oh, we had lots of it. And when we moved away, I literally had 8 large trailerfuls that we brought to the, not the Goodwill, but the Goodwill type of store that we had in our town. But yet we still had quite a few containers that we took with us. Some years after we had moved, I'm still tripping over some of the boxes, and I thought maybe we need to thin some of these out. So I cracked a few open, only to find papers upon papers upon papers. And why are we keeping all these papers? We had owner manuals of things we didn't even own anymore, bank statements, receipts, and gads of unopened envelopes. So I started a fire behind the house. I love fires. Just keep that a secret too. But I do. I enjoy flames and putting stuff in the flames. But if you ever tried to burn envelopes and stacks of paper, it doesn't burn. It just smolders, and you got to rip it up and crunkle it up so the air gets through it. And after a while, it's just not monogamous, monotonous. I thought, I'm just going to dump all this stuff on there and let it smolder so the whole neighborhood can enjoy this. But I'm glad I didn't, because in the bottom of that stack, I found something of great value. And I pulled that envelope out just in time to find my collection of $2 bills. Kidding. It wasn't that. It was something of much greater value. But I do have a collection of $2 bills. They're not that valuable, by the way, just an added bonus here. You can go to the bank and get them most any time, but I like to hand them out to people because they think it's a real treasure. So much fun. But I'll show you what it was, what I actually pulled out in a few minutes. But it was something that was truly a reminder that life was not about me. It was not about me or my wife or us together. It was not about us. It brought my thoughts back to the birth of our first child and the weeks leading up to that day. Daily routine as normal. We went to work, both of us, every day, and we had the usual challenges. We had plans for the future. Then the reality of this oncoming change was getting closer, but still hadn't sunk in. That there would be new responsibilities, new challenges, new dangers and threats, because we would be a family now. Then we went to the ultrasound. It was the weirdest, the ultrasound. I mean, it's the ultrasound. It was the weirdest thing ever. It sounded to me like a giant squid attacking a submarine. Don't know why. Never been in one submarine or seen a giant squid, but that's just what it came to mind. Then on the screen, this blurry stuff oozing and mushing around inside of my wife's abdomen there. Still didn't sink in. A little hand appeared and disappeared. And the same thing with a little foot appeared and disappeared. I thought, that's cool. But it still didn't sink in. Until his little face showed up clearly. Wow. It's a little child. It's our little child. And my view of my world changed because I knew that no longer were our lives about us. The psalmist in Psalm 136 says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand." Since that birth of our first child, my paradigm has shifted many times. 2 years later, we had a second son. And the dynamics of having two boys compared to one, many of you will know, is much different. My mother passed away unexpectedly due to a car accident. And she was the one who held our family together, who made the arrangements for all the family get-togethers and the weekly dinners and stuff. And now that fell onto my dad, who was grieving. I changed jobs several times, each one of those bringing a different opportunity, unfamiliar stress, new pressures on our family. We've lost some very close pets. I never thought that was an issue, but it is. It was far more difficult and life-changing than I expected. Important friendships have come and gone. People that I thought would be close and in our life for the duration moved on. And others would move in. And it changed things each time. 9/11 happened. Then the first and the second Gulf Wars. And the pandemic, of course, which I think everyone could say, yeah, my view of my world and the world in general has changed. Our world is not just in transition, but it seems to be in a constant flutter. But even a bigger change is on the way. I think of my Uncle Steve, and you may not catch how this connects, but I loved my Uncle Steve. He was kind of a basket case for many years, but in the end, he was born again and became one of the pillars of faith in my family. But in the earlier years of my brother and my life, Uncle Steve was one of those guys who deserved everything we could throw at him. He was a chain smoker. And my brother had these things called cigarette loads. They were like a little piece of a toothpick with white explosive powder on them. You shoved them down in somebody's cigarette and hid it back in the pack. We were sitting in the basement and the whole family was gathered around. Uncle Steve couldn't find his cigarette pack, and then we generously offered it to him with one sticking out. And he grabbed that and said, "Wait a minute, you guys didn't put one of them firecrackers in here again, did you?" And we just looked innocent as we possibly could. So he pulled that one out, lit it up, and it started to crackle and spit and sputter. And he says, "Hey, I thought you guys didn't put one of those things in there." And then we looked at each other and said, "It was a dud." So then he took a couple more puffs and it spit and sputtered again. He goes, "Did you put two of them in here?" We said, "No." That's just the after effects, but it was a dud. So he puffed away for quite a long time. Everybody is just not paying attention anymore. And suddenly, boom! It blew the whole thing off except for the filter. It was like one of those cartoons when they have a stick of dynamite and it blows up, and the next scene you see they're all charcoal and their hair's all going back. It was perfect. Couldn't have happened any better. Covered with confetti and tobacco. We will always remember that moment. But our world is like that. We keep seeing these things on the news happening in politics and with the weather and all these different things. But the big thing is still yet to come. We're just spitting and sputtering right now. But one day, the big bang's going to happen. And I think none of us are going to hear it, because what we'll hear is a trumpet sound. There's a well-known story about Jesus. And I say about Jesus. We typically think it's about someone else. But I'm going to tell you, this story is exclusively about Jesus. We just have some very famous characters in there. But it expresses the fact that life is not about us. It's found in John 11. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and his sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, who happened to be perhaps days' walk away. "Lord, the one you love is sick." Now, it's not just the word sick like there's a snuffle or a cold or the flu. This is a grave illness that requires immediate attention. When Jesus heard this, he said, "This sickness will not end in death." He said it will not end in death. He didn't say it wouldn't cause death, but he said it will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Interesting. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So these are close people. These are like family. So when he heard that Lazarus, somebody really close to him, was sick, he stayed where he was in this faraway place 2 more days. Why? And then he said, after that, he said, "Let's go to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews had tried to stone you, and yet you're going back?" Now, Jesus often inserts into stories and parables things that don't seem to be connected, but they're little jewels that really are. And he says, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. He's saying that my time on earth is short, regardless of who's out to get me. I have a purpose to fulfill. Let's fulfill it. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going to wake him up. It's almost like Jesus, after the fact, looking back, it's almost like Jesus having a little bit of fun with his disciples. Because his disciples reply, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. But Jesus was speaking about death, not actual sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go. Now, one who was there was Thomas, who later became known as the doubter. Well, he perhaps was doubting again here today, because commentators say that what Thomas is about to say was sarcasm. But Thomas said, okay, let us all go then, and let us all die with him. So on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb dead for 4 days. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. She seems genuine in the first part, but not so in the second. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said, I know he'll rise again at the resurrection in the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord. I believe that you're the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into this world. And after she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and said, the teacher is here and he's asking for you. And then Mary got up and went quickly. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. So when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some said, could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more, deeply moved, and he came to the tomb. It was a cave where a stone had laid across, and he said, take away the stone. But Lord said, Martha, my brother has been dead for 4 days. It's going to smell. She is totally beyond belief that Jesus can recover him from the dead. And Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And the man rose and came forth with his legs and his arms wrapped in linen. And just Jesus said, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Jesus speaks of this grave illness that Lazarus has as for the glory of God. He further indicates that it is also so that Jesus, he, may be glorified, as well as others, that they may come to believe. He intentionally delays his departure to help somebody he really loves 2 more days. And that departure delay causes Lazarus, one that he loves, to die. Why would Jesus do that? And he further exclaims that he is glad for the sakes of the disciples that he was not there for Lazarus. We may be shocked to hear this. Why would Jesus act this way for somebody? He has the power to save a person from death, but yet he delays, so purposely that person dies. Why would he do that? Seemingly not even to care. But if you're in shock about this, or you wonder, it's largely because we have a false understanding. Because we think the story is about Lazarus, and I said to you, this is a story about Jesus. But it's obviously talking heavily about Lazarus. But it's not about Lazarus. And we think that because we connect his death with human loss. Because we still seem to think that life is about us, about the individual. But the story is about Jesus, showing his divine power on earth. Because Lazarus lived and he died, and he lived again, and he died again. Solely for the purpose, God's divine purpose. This story may be subtle, maybe even a hint, but it's a reminder to each of us that life is not about us. In that story, I'm sure you've read it before. Did you ever wonder why Jesus wept? Because he could raise Lazarus from the dead. It was no big deal for him. Why would he be overcome with grief because somebody died for a time that he was going to bring back? The main reason is because he was not only fully God, but he was fully human. And in that humanity, when we are surrounded by people who are emotionally grieving, it just comes out. And Jesus' humanity came out in his grief. But there's a second reason. He also wept because of the unbelief of his friends. They never caught on to who he really was and what he really could do. And that he could simply raise this man from the dead. Ultimately, they were focused on their own loss and missed the purpose of God in all of this. We live at an age that emphasizes the importance of the individual. And that may be commendable in some ways, but it has to be seen and done in the light of God's glory. Our world also esteems health and comfort and emotional happiness. Again, commendable in some ways. But the greatest good is our spiritual well-being and our eternal wholeness. God is far more concerned with our eternal destiny than he is with our present comfort. Jesus said it is better to cut off a hand or lose an eye than to lose your soul. But our human nature places our personal well-being far above all else. Not so with God. Proverbs 19 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." We focus on what's in it for us, our daily needs and wants and desires, when we should be focused on what does God desire or require from us, because he will provide all those needs for us. It's not easy to accept that life is not about us, but we were created and exist specifically to give glory to God and to share that glory with others. Paul in 1 Corinthians says, "Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, whom you have from God? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body." Some years ago, I came home from work, pulled up into the driveway, immediately noticed something in the street. It was an injured bird. It happened to be a hen wood duck. And her wing was just hanging terribly mangled on the ground like this. I thought, I got to do something for this bird. So as I got out of the truck, she hobbled, dragging her leg too, and made it even worse. Like, oh my, stop. So I'm carefully trying to catch it because it can't really escape me that much. It's all crippled. And then it crosses up onto the curb, and I just got to stop for a minute. It's like, what do I do if I do catch it? How am I going to fix it? And how can I catch it without making things worse? And then on the other side of the street, something caught my attention. There was a group of little ducklings. And I thought, wow, isn't that cool? Look at that. Oh, wait a minute. That ain't cool at all because Mama's injured. How's she going to take care of the baby ducks? And where is Mama? Now, where'd she go? Oh, then I see her up on the lawn, weaving back and forth in some of the bushes, running like a champion with no broken wing at all. She goes over to the baby ducks, over the edge into the river, and I immediately burst out in laughter, and I said, okay, bird, you got me. I had been bamboozled by nature because that's a well-known trait with some animals where they feign an injury and they misdirect a potential predator away from their family so that the family can live, even to the point of death in some instances, but they're usually pretty good at this. So anyways, an example of where God has instinctively placed in some animals that life is not about them. A few weeks ago, another selfless act occurred. Our former president was grazed by a bullet. I was relieved that his life was spared. And I thank Pastor Ben for his prayer for America before the service. And we do need to take that seriously more than ever now. But I pray for that man. And I pray that he was divinely influenced to know that he was this far from eternity. And I pray that he understands that there's a difference between speaking about God and truly knowing God. And I pray that that transformation happens. I also pray for the family of that shooter because he has left behind somebody who's grieving. They're grieving for the loss of a son, but now they're also grieving for the legacy that has been assigned to that family. And I bring all this up because there were others that day were hit with bullets. 2 of them survived and recovered, but 1 did not. One man named Corey Comparator passed away. He took that bullet, and he died shielding and covering his own family with his body. Truly selfless act from a man who understood that life was not about him. If we have anybody for the worship team to come up, if not, that's fine. But I began this morning talking about a burn pile and rescuing this great treasure. A treasure that had great value, and it wasn't a treasure like I showed you that would be laid up in heaven or on earth. It was a treasure that would be laid up in heaven. It was a simple piece of paper. And every time I look at this, I get emotional. It would have been just the loss of a piece of paper, but it's what it represented. It's got 2 little footprints on it. My son's birth certificate. When I saw it that morning, that afternoon, it caused me to think. And after that, it caused many times to think of the sacrifice that God may ask of me or of you and how I would respond, or you. If a shooter entered this room today, and that's not beyond reality, Would you or would I jump for cover? Or would we jump to cover someone else? Ask yourself this question. Do I live my life for myself? Or do I really understand that life is not about me, and I live this life for God? When I was in high school or junior high, I had to read A Tale of Two Cities. I was not all that interested in reading, so I got the movie, and I watched and I passed the class through that. But that movie is about the French Revolution, where the poor people rise up and they take over the elites and they execute them one after another in the guillotine. One man who lived a depraved life, never felt he could ever do anything worthwhile, found a person who he felt was worth sparing. He, in secret, substituted himself for that man. And he went into the guillotine and died in his place. In the last moments of that movie, you see him standing there and he says this: "It's a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far better rest that I go than I have ever known." The guillotine drops along with his head, and the screen blackens out, and the words of Jesus appear. From John 15, where Jesus says this: "Greater love has no one than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends." Every speaker, and I think most pastors, want to know that they're making a difference in the lives of people and that their message would be memorable. But I truly, honestly say to you today, if you forget everything I said, even forget I was here, even forget that I even exist, I'm okay with that. Because I want you to remember the most important words of Jesus that last forever. Greater love has no one than this, that a man lay down his life